Okay, so I'm coming with a message of hope, actually. In the savings and loan crisis, which was 1/70th the size of this crisis, our agency made over 10,000 criminal referrals, and that resulted in the conviction on felony grounds of over 1,000 elites in what were designated as major cases. And to pick up on what's just been said, this is not some sidelight to economics. This is why we have recurrent, intensifying crises, is these epidemics of fraud led from the C-suite, from the CEOs and the CFOs. The savings and loan crisis, the inevitable National Commission said fraud was invariably present at the typical large failure. In the Enron era, always frauds from the very top of the organization. And in this crisis, the frauds came from the top of the organization again. But what's different in this crisis? In this crisis, the same agency that I worked with that made over 10,000 criminal referrals in a tinier crisis made 0 criminal referrals. They got rid of the entire function. And so there are 0 convictions of anybody in the elite ranks of Wall Street. And if they can defraud us with impunity, then they will cause crisis after crisis, and they will produce maximum inequality. The group that has the audacity to refer to itself as the productive class is the largest destroyer of lives, of jobs, and of wealth of any group ever produced in this world. They wiped out 6 million existing jobs and 5 to 6 million jobs that would have been created. As you've heard, they've left 26 million Americans wanting full-time work with no ability to find that work. If you look at just losses in the household sector, it is $11 trillion. A trillion is 1,000 billion. And then they had the nerve to say they are the productive class, and not this journalist, but what we get as faux journalism today repeats this endlessly as if it were a fact, that they create jobs, they destroy jobs, they are mass destroyers of jobs. I told you I would bring you a message of hope. I will disagree a little bit with a fact pattern about the Reagan administration and re-regulation on savings and loans, because that's where I was. I will tell you this. Everybody opposed our re-regulation of the industry. The big deregulation bill, the equivalent of the repeal of Glass-Steagall and such, occurred in 1982, became effective in 1983. By November 1983, we were already re-regulating the savings and loan industry. And we were called re-regulators because that was the greatest swear word the Reagan administration believed existed, to call people re-regulators. But this was not partisan. A majority of the members of the House, at the time it was controlled by Democrats, co-sponsored a resolution saying, do not go forward with re-regulation. 5 U.S. senators, who became known as the Keating Five, because the most infamous fraud of that era got them together. And who, by the way, did that Charles Keating, that fraud, use to recruit the Keating Five? Brought him as a lobbyist to walk the streets of the Senate, the halls of the Senate? A guy named Alan Greenspan, who also put in writing that Lincoln Savings posed no foreseeable risk of loss. It was only the most expensive failure, a 3,000 position error. And after he got everything wrong in the most important issues he had ever dealt with, after that fact, we named him chairman of the Federal Reserve because we promote incompetence if it helps the 1%. The Reagan administration was so outraged that we were closing insolvent savings and loans with great political support that the Office of Management and Budget threatened to file a criminal referral against the head of our agency on the grounds that he was closing too many insolvent banks. We had that problem recently. You see Geithner out trying to close the big, powerful banks. And the Reagan administration tried to appoint 2 members. There were only 3 members running the place. So this would have given control to Charles Keating, the most notorious fraud in the savings and loan crisis, selected 2 individuals to run the agency that would then not regulate him. One of them got knocked out on ambiguous political grounds, and the other ones I had to blow the whistle to get him to resign in disgrace. But of course, they didn't prosecute him. We can prosecute these frauds. The Federal Housing Finance Administration has just filed complaints saying 17 of the largest banks in America committed massive fraud, endemic fraud, and that there is a paper trail proving that they did so. So where is the Justice Department? Why is it not indicting these clear frauds? When you are told no one could have seen this crisis coming, ask them about the subprime crisis of 1990 to 1991. It's a trick question. As all good things do in the world of fraud, this one started in Orange County, where you had significant people making liars' loans. Now remember, it is the lenders who put the lies in liars' loans, not the borrowers. We know this empirically. And we stopped that because that was insane as regulators. So guess what happened? The leading folks making liars' loans gave up their federal charter, gave up federal deposit insurance, and became a mortgage bank for the sole purpose of escaping regulation. And they changed their name, and some of you will recognize this name, to Ameriquest. Ameriquest, the leading predatory lender that, in addition to making liars' loans every day of the week, targeted minorities to destroy that wealth that you just heard about. They targeted Latinos, they targeted blacks, and they were caught. And they were caught 3 times doing this, and the Justice Department refused to prosecute. Instead, they settled for $400 million, and guess what happened to the head of Ameriquest? Did he, A, resign in disgrace? B, was he indicted? Or C, did we make him our ambassador to the Netherlands? Got it in one. Now, how hard is this to figure out? Why do you think we made him our ambassador to the Netherlands? Because he was the leading political contributor to the President of the United States of America. And that's bad, but what comes next is far worse. Remember, this is the most notorious fraud in the nation. It targets minorities. Everybody knows it does so. 2 entities rush to acquire these personnel and this business. And their names, Citicorp and Washington Mutual, who become 2 of the most notorious frauds in all of this. So time-wise, I'll stop here, but the case is, when we prosecuted, we had a 90% conviction rate when they have the best criminal defense lawyers in the world, and they spend money like water to protect the CEO from going to prison. So when they tell you no one can stop this, it is utter nonsense. Leave you with these statistics. The FBI warned of this in September 2004 in open testimony. It warned expressly that there was an I'm quoting, an epidemic of mortgage fraud, and it predicted it would cause a financial crisis. If that's not enough, the industry's own anti-fraud experts in 2006, in writing, went to every mortgage banker in America and virtually every other lender, said three things. Stated income loans are an open invitation to fraudsters. The incidence of fraud in such loans is 90%, 90. They are all fraudulent. And third, these loans deserve the phrase used by the industry behind closed door. They are liars' loans because they are pervasively fraudulent. How big did they get? Well, what did the industry do after it was warned? Did it stop making these loans? No. It massively increased the amount of these loans such that by 2006, 1 out of every 3 home loans in America was a liar's loan. And that's why we have a crisis, and it came from the very top of these organizations, and it went through, as the FHFA said in its complaint, the largest banks in the world were endemically fraudulent. It is not a few rotten apples. It is an orchard of 1%ers who are rotten to the core.
Before we get to our next speaker, I just want to ask you a question to bring it up from the savings and loan to the recent crisis. The problem is not just that the loans were fraudulent, but that the banks would not keep the loans. So they had no skin in the game because they could put them into securities. That's the thing that Brooksley Born warned against when she was head of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. That's why the Clinton administration supported Phil Gramm in reversing that decision. So I would like you, if you would just comment a little bit on the legality there was Lawrence Summers as our Treasury Secretary saying no law, no regulatory agency will apply to credit default swaps or collateralized debt obligations. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the legal significance of that.
Okay, so the first thing, since we're in California, is the California energy crisis. Because this same law created a regulatory black hole for energy trading derivatives. And Phil Gramm was instrumental in doing it, and Wendy Graham, his spouse, went on the board of which corporation, can you guess? Enron! And they exploited this to create artificial shortages as a way to massively jack up prices, and they created, between that and taking capacity offline, a deliberate non-crisis, right? There was no crisis, but they created one and devastated this state. The same thing, far broader in the current crisis, led to $1 trillion. Now remember, this is after the warnings that this stuff is endemically fraudulent. And this is the most sophisticated financial institutions in the world doing this. This is Merrill Lynch, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, creating this nonsense. So they take garbage that is 90% fraudulent, they get together with a rating agency who they shop to get the AAA rating, and supposedly AAA is the best conceivable rating. So complete fraudulent garbage gets created as AAA. It's sold over much of the world to the unsuspecting in part, but kept in large part just because it creates bonuses. So yes, it was this second stage of derivatives. And let me tell you one thing about that law that hasn't been mentioned. This is the Commodities Future Modernization Act. In addition to blocking the particular rule that Brooksley Born wanted to protect us, it removed all jurisdiction so that she could not adopt, and her successors could not adopt any rule protecting us. That's horrific. What comes next is even worse. There are actually a provision of that law that exempts you, if you do credit default swaps, from state boiler room laws. Boiler rooms are fraudulent securities sales. Can you imagine passing a statute saying we hereby immunize you from committing fraud, from being punished for committing fraud. And if you can't imagine it, then this is the answer to the question that you asked Robert Reich. The state attorney generals are being pressured by the Obama administration and by the industry. And by the way, the Republicans are completely silent about this incredible scandal, to immunize not just that you will not be prosecuted as a bank, they are trying to immunize them against being investigated. They don't want you to learn any of the facts, because if you do learn the facts, you will insist that those thousands of top bankers, as in the savings and loan crisis, be taken on the perp walks, be put in prison, so they are not here to cause the next crisis.